I built the AI that made my hedge fund millions. My manager said he could find 50 guys like me in an hour. So I quit, moved to Michigan, and waited for the CEO to fly out and beg me back. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Story Zone. Hit that subscribe button right now because this one is going to make you want to stand up and slow clap. This is not a story about someone who got walked over and eventually snapped. This is a story about someone who saw every move coming, documented everything, built his leverage quietly over years, and then when the moment finally arrived, cashed it all in with the calm of someone who already knew how it was going to end. It is a story about knowing your worth, about what happens when the wrong manager stands between a company and the person keeping its lights on, and about a CEO who eventually had no choice but to get on a plane to Michigan and find out firsthand what it costs to underestimate the wrong person. My name is Tim. I am 34 years old, and this is my story. I want to start at the beginning because I think the beginning matters. I did not come from money. I grew up in Michigan in a regular household, the kind where you understood early that if you wanted something you were going to have to build it yourself. My parents were not programmers. Nobody in my family was in tech. But when I was 7 years old, my dad brought home a computer, nothing fancy, a basic home machine, and something clicked in my brain that has never really unclicked since. I started teaching myself how it worked. Not just how to use it, how it worked, the logic underneath. The way you could give a machine a set of instructions and it would follow them exactly every time without question and produce something real. By the time I was in middle school, I had moved well past anything a class was going to teach me. By high school, I was building things that my teachers did not fully understand. I do not say that to brag. I say it because it shaped the way I thought about my future. I knew what I was good at. I knew it early. The question was never whether I could do the work. The question was always how to build a life around doing it. I went to a state university in Michigan. Not a prestigious name-brand school, a solid, respected state program that I chose partly because it was good and partly because it was what I could afford. I took out student loans. I worked part-time through most of my degree. I graduated with a computer science diploma, a modest amount of debt, and a very specific career goal that I had been working toward since before I could have articulated it in professional terms. I wanted to work at the intersection of programming and finance. I had figured out early that the most interesting, most complex, most consequential software problems in the world were not in consumer apps or social media platforms. They were in financial systems, in the infrastructure that moves money, manages risk, executes transactions, models markets. The code that runs underneath the global financial system is some of the most demanding, most high-stakes code ever written, and the people who write it well are worth an enormous amount to the organizations that need it. I wanted to be one of those people, so I built myself into one. After graduation, I worked my way up through the industry methodically. I spent time at Google. I spent time at Facebook. I spent time at Amazon. Each stop was more technically demanding than the last, each one adding something to my skill set and my resume that the next employer valued. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had built the kind of track record that opens doors. I had worked on systems at a scale that most programmers never encounter. I understood not just how to write good code, but how to design systems that perform under real-world pressure, that scale, that survive edge cases, that keep working when everything around them is going wrong. That is a different skill from programming. A lot of people can program. Very few people can build systems that hold. When I got the call from the hedge fund, I was ready for it. I joined the hedge fund at $120,000 a year. I want to be honest about that number. On paper, in isolation, $120,000 sounds like good money. And in a vacuum, I suppose it is. But I was not in a vacuum. I was in a specific industry doing a specific job at a specific level of seniority in the most expensive city in the country. And when you looked at what comparable roles at comparable firms were paying, people doing similar work with similar experience at similar organizations, the number was not 120,000. It was closer to 180, sometimes more. I knew this when I took the job. I took it anyway, for a reason that I have since revisited many times in my head. They promised me room to grow. Not just in vague terms, in specific ones. Career progression, technical leadership, the chance to build something significant and be recognized for it. The recruiting pitch was compelling. The work was genuinely interesting. And I was 30 years old and optimistic, which is a combination that occasionally leads people to accept less than they are worth on the promise of more to come. What I built at that fund was an AI trading system. Not a component of one, not a module, the system. The architecture, the optimization, the logic that allowed the fund to identify and execute opportunities in the market at a volume and speed that generated real, significant returns. On a normal trading day, that system executed millions of transactions. The revenue it produced for the fund was not a rounding error. It was a material part of how the organization made money. I knew what I had built. I knew what it was worth. I also knew that I was being paid $120,000 a year to maintain and improve it, while the fund's principals were collecting returns that bore no resemblance to that number. I raised it with Larry, multiple times over multiple years. And every time Larry had an answer. I need to tell you about Larry. Larry was my manager. Mid-level, the kind of position that exists in many organizations as a layer between the people doing the actual work and the people making the actual decisions. Larry had been at the fund for a while before I arrived and had built what I can only describe as a talent for being present when things went well and absent when things went wrong. He was good at meetings. He was good at language, the specific corporate vocabulary of strategy and vision and alignment that sounds like substance but rarely contains any. He had a firm handshake and a confident manner, and he knew how to present in front of partners. What Larry was not good at was the work. Not the technical work, anyway. Larry could not have written the code I wrote. Larry could not have designed the system I designed. Larry, if I am being completely honest, could not have explained to you in any meaningful technical detail what the system actually did or why the decisions I made in building it were the right ones. And that was fine. Not everyone in management needs to be a hands-on technical contributor. What is not fine is when the gap between what you can do and what you claim credit for becomes a defining feature of how you operate. And with Larry, it was a defining feature. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I had spent 3 weeks working on an optimization to the trading system, a significant one, the kind that required careful analysis, careful testing, and the kind of judgment that only comes from deeply understanding both the code base and the financial logic it was built around. The optimization reduced latency in a way that measurably improved execution quality. When the results came in, Larry presented them to the fund's leadership. I was not in the room. The email that went to the partners afterward described the improvement in terms of what our team had accomplished, with Larry's name prominent in the summary and mine appearing once, near the bottom, in a list of contributors. I thought about saying something. I decided to watch instead. A few months later, something broke in the system at 2 in the morning. A critical issue, the kind that if left unresolved would have caused problems when markets opened. I got the alert, got out of bed, opened my laptop, and spent the next 4 hours diagnosing and fixing the problem. By 6 a.m., everything was stable. At 9 a.m., Larry sent an email to the partners describing how the team had responded swiftly to an overnight incident and ensured continuity of operations. He CC'd me, which I suppose was something. This pattern repeated itself for years. Tim builds something, Larry presents it. Tim fixes something, Larry reports on it. Tim solves a problem, Larry's name is on the solution. The colleagues who worked closely with us noticed. There were conversations in hallways and over lunch that I was aware of without being part of. People knew. But Larry was the manager, and Larry was good at managing up, and the partners saw what Larry showed them. There was one moment in particular that I still think about. A quarterly review with the fund's senior partners, the kind of meeting where the people controlling the money sit down and want to understand what the technology team has been doing and why it matters. Larry presented. He walked them through the system improvements of the past 3 months, using slides I had helped prepare, describing architectural decisions I had made, citing performance numbers that were the direct result of work I had done. He used the word "we" throughout. He fielded questions, some of which he answered correctly because I had briefed him beforehand, and some of which he answered incorrectly because he did not actually understand what he was talking about. Afterward, one of the partners stopped me in the hallway and said something that has stayed with me. "Good work this quarter, Tim. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." He said it quietly, like it was a small aside. But he said it to me, not to Larry. I think people understood more than Larry realized. I raised the pay issue for the first time about 18 months in. I sat down with Larry, laid out my case, the system I had built, its performance, its revenue impact, the market rates for comparable roles, and asked for a raise that would bring me closer to what the work was actually worth. Larry listened. He nodded in the ways that managers nod when they want you to feel heard without committing to anything. He said I was valued. He said the timing wasn't ideal but that he was going to advocate for me. He said to give it until the next review cycle. I gave it until the next review cycle. The raise did not come. I raised it again. Larry said the fund was being cautious, that there were conversations happening at the partner level about compensation structures, that these things took time. He told me to be patient and trust the process. I was 32 years old and I had been patient for 2 years and the process had produced nothing, but I nodded and went back to my desk. Then COVID hit, and Larry's next answer was the pandemic. It was a bad time to push on compensation, Larry told me. The market was uncertain. Everyone was being cautious. This was not the moment to make demands. What I should be focused on was being a team player, demonstrating value, making sure I was the last person anyone thought about cutting if things got difficult. The subtext was clear. Be grateful you have a job. I was 33. I had been at the fund for 3 years. I had built a system that was generating millions of dollars. And I was being told that $120,000 a year was what gratitude looked like right now. I kept working. I kept building. And I started paying closer attention to what was happening outside the fund. COVID changed a lot of things, but the thing it changed most directly for me was my relationship with geography. I was living in Manhattan. My apartment cost me $4,500 a month. It was a fine apartment, clean, well located, the things you pay for in New York, but it had no yard, no garage, no outdoor space of any kind, and windows that looked primarily at other buildings. I had been paying $4,500 a month to live in a box in the most expensive city in the country because that was where the job was. That was the deal. You want to work in finance, you live in New York. Everyone understood that. But during COVID, I was not working in New York. I was working in my apartment. And my apartment could have been anywhere. I started thinking about Michigan. I had grown up there. I knew what a house looked like from the inside, what a yard felt like, what it meant to have space around you. I started looking at what the housing market in my hometown looked like. What $4,500 a month translated to in mortgage payments in a place where the cost of living was not engineered to extract maximum dollars from people who felt they had no choice. The math was not close. I found a house. A real house, the kind that New York finance professionals collect pictures of on their phones and tell themselves they will own someday when they finally leave the city. Heated pool. 3-car garage. A proper yard, and on the property, in the backyard, a second structure, a full guest suite, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, completely detached from the main house, that I converted into the kind of personal space that I had never had in Manhattan and had quietly wanted for years. My own building. My own rules. Whatever I wanted it to be. My mortgage payment was less than half of what I had been paying in rent. I moved. I did not make a formal announcement to my employer. I did not file paperwork with HR or schedule a meeting with Larry to discuss the logistics. I was a remote employee during a period when the entire organization was remote, and I relocated within that context. The work continued. The system continued running. The trades continued executing. The results continued arriving. Nothing about my professional output changed in any way that anyone could point to, because nothing about my professional output had changed. I was doing the same job I had always done. I was just doing it from Michigan. I spent the rest of the pandemic work-from-home period doing what I always did. Working, building, improving, living for the first time in years in a way that felt like a life rather than a staging area for a life. Then COVID ended. Or at least the part of it that gave companies cover for remote work did. And Larry called. Tim, we're starting back at the office on Monday. Yeah, I said. About that. I moved to Michigan. There was a silence on the line. Then, you didn't ask if you could do that. I told Larry, in the most level tone I could manage, that I had not been aware I needed his permission to choose where I lived. He did not find this funny. He told me I needed to move back to New York City, that the company expected its people in the office. that if I was not prepared to return, my position would be in jeopardy. I laid out my position clearly. I had been producing the same work at the same level from home for over a year. Nothing had slipped. Nothing had been late. The system I had built was running exactly as it was supposed to run. I was willing to travel to New York for important meetings on my own dime, no expense required, a few times a year. But my quality of life in Michigan was significantly better than anything New York had to offer me, and I had no intention of moving back. Larry laughed. And I mean that literally. He laughed in the specific way that people laugh when they want you to understand that they find your position not just wrong but faintly ridiculous. Then he said something that I have thought about many times since. "Tim, I can find 50 guys like you in an hour." I paused. I let that sit for a moment, and then I told Larry that I quit. I want to explain something to anyone reading this who has not spent time in serious software development, because it is important for understanding what happened next. Code is not like other deliverables. When you write a report or build a financial model or design a marketing campaign, the thing you produce exists independently of you. Someone else can pick it up, read it, understand it, modify it. The logic is visible. The reasoning is on the surface. Complex code is different. A large, sophisticated codebase, especially one built over years by a single primary architect, is not just a set of instructions. It is the crystallized record of thousands of decisions, each one made for a reason that may or may not be documented anywhere. Why does this function work this way? Because 18 months ago there was an edge case that broke the previous approach, and the person who fixed it understood something about the system's behavior under specific market conditions that no one else had ever needed to learn. Why is this module structured like this instead of the more obvious way? Because the obvious way turns out to perform badly under high volume, and the person who discovered that spent 2 weeks figuring out a better approach and then implemented it without fanfare. That knowledge lives in the person who wrote the code. Not fully in the documentation. Documentation captures the what, not always the why. Not fully in the code itself. The code shows you what is there, not the 10 other things that were tried first. When that person leaves, the knowledge leaves with them. What remains is a system that works until it doesn't, and a team of people doing their best to understand something they did not build. I had spent years building the trading system at that fund. The people who remained after I left were competent. They were not me. They were looking at my code the way someone looks at a house they just moved into. They could see the walls and the floors, but they did not know where the pipes ran or why the previous owner had made the choices they made. And in a system executing millions of trades a day, that gap between surface understanding and deep understanding is not academic. It is operational risk. The clock started ticking the day I walked out. 6 weeks after I quit, my phone rang. The number was John, the CEO of the fund. Not Larry. Not HR, not some mid-level manager tasked with handling the situation. The CEO. The person who sat at the top of the organization and who had, I assume, spent 6 weeks watching what happened when I was gone and arrived at the conclusion that something needed to be done about it. John said the fund needed me back. He said I had provided enormous value and that the team was struggling without me. He suggested they fly me out to New York to sit down and talk. I told him no. How about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss it here? I said it for a specific reason. If this conversation was going to happen, if there was any version of me returning to that organization, it was going to happen on my terms, in my state, in the place I had chosen to build my life. I was not going to get on a plane and sit across a table in a Manhattan conference room and negotiate from a position that implied I needed them more than they needed me. John was going to come to me, or we were not going to talk. John agreed. 2 days later, he flew to Michigan. We sat down at my place. John looked around, the house, the property, the setup I had built, and I think he understood something in that moment about the negotiation he was about to have. This was not a man who was desperate to come back. This was a man who had built something good and was comfortable in it. John opened by acknowledging what everyone on the inside already knew. I had been a significant contributor, the team was struggling, and the fund wanted me back. Then he named his terms. He proposed bringing me back at a 20% reduction from my previous salary. He framed it as a cost of living adjustment. I was no longer living in New York, the thinking went, so the New York premium on my compensation was no longer justified. I let him finish. Then I told him what I wanted. $200,000 a year. John's expression shifted. That was not the number he had been expecting. I kept going before he could respond. The trading system I had built was executing millions of transactions every day and generating returns that dwarfed any reasonable estimate of what my salary should be. People doing comparable work at comparable organizations were being paid in that range or above it. And, I said this carefully because it was true and I wanted him to understand it was true, I currently had 2 other offers on the table. Real offers with numbers attached, from organizations that had reached out after word got around that I was available. I had been planning to start responding to those offers on Monday. It was Tuesday. John sat with this for a moment. Then he asked if there was anything else. Yes, I said. My second condition is that Larry is gone. Completely gone. Not reassigned to a team I interact with, not moved to a different floor. Gone from any part of my professional world before I sign anything. John leaned back. He said I was asking for a lot. I told him he did not have to bring me back if he did not want to. I would be fine. I had been fine for 6 weeks and I had 2 organizations ready to make my situation even finer starting next week. His offer expired Friday. I said it plainly, without drama, because it was simply true. There was a long pause. John looked around the room, the house, the property, the life I had clearly built and settled into, and I think he was doing the math in real time. He had flown from New York City to Michigan to negotiate with a man sitting comfortably in his own home, with 2 live offers, a hard deadline, and not one visible sign of anxiety about how this was going to end. That is a particular kind of leverage. Not a performance. Not a bluff. Just the quiet, settled reality of someone who genuinely does not need you to say yes. John said he needed to talk to the partners. He flew back to New York. Thursday afternoon my phone rang. Tim. It was John. We're transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be in your world anymore. And we're prepared to meet your compensation number. Can we send you an offer letter? I asked one more time, because I needed to hear it said directly. Larry is really gone? John confirmed it. I would never need to interact with Larry again. I told John to send the letter. I signed it that evening. I did not find out what happened to Larry all at once. It came to me in pieces, the way things do when you are no longer inside an organization but still connected to people who are. After I quit, Larry had a problem that I do not think he fully anticipated. His entire professional identity at that fund had been built on presenting the output of people who worked for him as evidence of his own leadership and vision. When I was there was output to present. When I left, there was not. The projects that had run smoothly under his management started running less smoothly. The things that had worked started working less well. And the gap between what Larry claimed to be and what Larry actually was became harder to paper over when the person doing the work he was claiming credit for was no longer in the building. People noticed. Colleagues who had suspected the dynamic for years started saying things out loud. Leadership started asking questions that Larry did not have satisfying answers to. A few months after I left, Larry was fired. I heard about it through the network, the kind of information that travels through an industry when someone's situation changes significantly. Last I heard, Larry was working at a bank. Not a hedge fund. A bank. In a position that was, by all accounts, considerably more junior than the one he had held when he was presenting my work to partners and telling me he could find 50 guys like me in an hour. I have thought about that line a lot. 50 guys like me in an hour. I wonder sometimes if he actually believed it, or if it was just the thing that came out when he needed something to say. I wonder if he thinks about it now, sitting in his bank job, having been fired from the position he built largely on my output. I do not spend a lot of time on this. I have a heated pool. I have better things to do. I am writing this from Michigan. It is a Tuesday morning and I can see the pool from where I am sitting. The mortgage on this house is less than half what I paid in rent for an apartment in Manhattan. My compensation is $200,000 a year. I have not been to New York City since I moved. I have not heard from Larry. I have not seen his name on an email, a meeting invite, a Slack message, or any other form of communication. I think about what the past few years would have looked like if I had handled things differently. If I had gone back to New York when Larry told me to. If I had accepted the 20% pay cut John initially proposed and been grateful for it. If I had let the Larry conversation play out the way Larry expected it to play out, with me backing down and returning to $120,000 and a Manhattan apartment and years more of watching my work get credited to someone else. That version of events was entirely available to me. I just chose not to take it. The two offers I had on the table, the ones I told John the first would start responding to on Monday, I never took them. I did not need to. They were not a bluff. They were real, and John knew that, and that reality was the foundation of everything that happened in that conversation. Real leverage is not a performance. It is just the actual, documented, verifiable fact that you have options, stated plainly, without exaggeration, by someone who is genuinely prepared to use them. John said yes anyway, and I think that is the part of this story I most want people to take away. Not the house or the raise or even the Larry situation, satisfying as all of that is. The part that matters is what happened when I stopped accepting the terms other people set for me and started naming my own. The years of Larry telling me to wait, to be patient, to be grateful, that was possible because I let it be possible. The moment I stopped letting it be possible, everything changed. Fast. Know what you have built. Know what it is worth. And make sure that when the moment comes, you are in a position where you genuinely do not need the other person to say yes. They tend to say yes. Update: I posted this a while back and a lot of you had questions, so let me answer a few of them. Several people asked whether I had any legal exposure for not disclosing the move during the remote work period. I looked into this carefully. My employment contract specified my role, my responsibilities, and my compensation. It did not specify that I was required to maintain a residence within any particular geographic area. During the period of company-wide remote work, I was a remote employee, and I remained a remote employee. I was not in breach of anything. Ideal communication? Maybe not. A fireable offense? My lawyer said no. A lot of people asked why the fund did not just hire someone to replace me rather than meet my terms. The honest answer is that replacing a person is not the same as replacing a role. Finding another senior programmer is possible. Finding someone who can come in and take over a system of that complexity, that was built over years, that has years of undocumented context baked into its architecture, and maintain it at the level required, without the person who built it available to explain the decisions that shaped it, is a months-long process at minimum. During those months, the system still needs to run. The risk is real and it is ongoing. John did the math and the math said, fly to Michigan. Someone asked if I felt bad about the Larry situation, about him losing his job. I have thought about this honestly. What happened to Larry was the result of Larry's choices over many years. He built a career on presenting other people's work as his own. When the people whose work he was presenting were no longer there, the foundation of that career was gone. I did not cause that. I just stopped being available to prevent it. A few people asked what I would have done if John had said no. If the partners had decided the number was too high or the Larry condition was a deal breaker. The honest answer is I would have taken one of the other offers. I had already looked at both of them carefully. Either one would have been a good outcome. That is not a brave thing to say. It is just the truth. The reason I was able to sit across from John and not blink was not because I am particularly fearless. It was because I had done the work of making sure I actually had somewhere else to go. Preparation is what confidence looks like from the outside. The last thing I want to say is this. For everyone reading this who is in a situation that sounds even a little bit like the one I was in, underpaid, overlooked, being told to wait while someone else benefits from what you build, start documenting. Start looking. Start having the conversations that feel uncomfortable to have. The market knows what you are worth even if your manager pretends not to. Find out what that number is. Build your options quietly. And when the moment comes, name your terms without apology. You might be surprised how quickly the phone rings. If this one got you fired up, and I think it did, you know what to do. Subscribe to the Story Zone. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments. What was your moment in this story? Was it the CEO getting on a plane to Michigan? Was it the $200,000 counter when they offered a pay cut? Was it the Larry condition? Or was it just the image of Tim sitting by his heated pool, mortgage half of what it used to be, Waiting for Thursday's phone call that he already knew was coming? Drop it below. We see every comment. We will see you in the next one.